Hello and welcome to the AUBER Roundtable. This is your place to hear current thoughts on a wide range of economic topics throughout the year. In this session, we're focused on demystifying the labor force participation data. One of the many gifts from COVID has been significant changes within the US labor market. Not only has the type of work had some shifts, but who's doing it and where that work takes place has also shifted. The reliance on incrementally changing time series data has faced a new type of headwind as we all seek to understand and forecast. As is often the case, the single metric, in this case, the labor force participation rate, both masks and serves as a proxy for a lengthy list of topics begging for a great discussion. We invite you to be part of the discussion today by adding your questions to the Zoom Q&A button, which you'll find in your toolbar. To get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce my fellow board member of AUBER, Rajeev Dhawan.
Thank you, James. Thanks for getting this roundtable on the road. This is our third one for the year or for the quarter. And I was tasked to welcome all the AUBERites and non-AUBERites who have joined in. And for the people who are joining in, who are non-AUBERites, this is a cool organization. That's the way I would describe it. And this is a place to meet experts on regional data and its analysis. And we hold a very cool annual conference, which is just about 10 weeks away. So I hope you can join in over there too. And if you are an AUBERite member, maybe hopefully you will make it over there and you already registered. So, I was tasked to do some talk about the economy today, and I was not the first choice of the second one. And the reason I'm here is because James' original choice is now down with COVID. So COVID is still on the horizon. It's not as bad as it was about a year ago. My sister and his entire family is suffering from it right now. Most of my younger staff's already gone through it. And this has all happened in the last 30 days. So please be safe and please be cautious. And with that, I will turn it to the hot news of the day, which is not that hot in that sense. Today's GDP report came out and it said it was another negative growth quarter. So people have been asking me, are we in a recession? And of course, if you read the media chatter, it talks about 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth is a recession. So but that's the rule of thumb. So the actual committee, which is the National Bureau of Economic Research, which declares a recession, does not use GDP as a measure for declaring a recession. It uses a whole variety. It's a long laundry list, but one thing they focus upon in the modern era is employment gains or losses to define a recession and a recovery. Now, if you go back to 1973 recession and you look over there, it was being defined, the starting and the ending date, by industrial production decline. And why is that? Because at that time in 75, 1 in 4 workers worked in manufacturing, and the saying that if GM sneezes, the economy catches a cold was very true. Right now, manufacturing is less than 8% of the employment. It's a service-based economy. So it's more about actual employment ups and down. So with that metric, I would say we are not in a recession. We've had about 500,000 on average jobs per month over the last 6 months, barring data revisions. We all know in AUBER what benchmarking is. We look at the benchmark data in our day-to-day analysis once a year in between May, March, and April. And we have seen some surprises over there at the regional level, me in Georgia especially, but I doubt that will happen. So how would I describe this time right now? I have a title for this kind of a situation. Remember, we are after the pandemic. Pandemic is over in a sense, but let's call it the post-pandemic economy. We have to use some new metrics. And the reason is that we're in what we call a transition economy. We're going from one steady state in the DSG modeling language to another steady state. And in between, there's going to be some ups and downs, transitions, which are going to be very, very non-intuitive. Like, how come in the middle of the recession in 2020, officially the 3-month one, we were buying a lot of stuff because we got stimulus checks and the other things. So there are a lot of reasons. So I call this thing the current environment as bearflation. So we have a bear market. Our 401ks, IRAs are down a lot. At the same time, there's inflation, which to us in the white collar jobs is hurting us when we go down to the grocery store or to the gas pump that much, but it's an irritant, but more so for the lower income people. And at the same time, employment is there and it's kind of like a full employment. So this is a full employment recession with the bear market in the stock market, in the financial markets, and inflation nipping at the heels, which the Fed is trying to solve. So the next question would be, how hawkish would they be? You know, yesterday Powell's testimony was kind of like interpreted as being a little bit softer compared to the written language. And I'm beginning to agree with that. I watched it live, but looking back today, I would say, yes, I think so. But at the same time, will the terminal rate for the federal fund rate go to 4%, 4.5%? Some people even have it at 5+. What will be my personal view? I'm not into the telling you about the forecast today. For that, you will have to come online to my August 31st conference. They will get all the answers to this one. And is the corporations going to invest and keep on hiring the people, which is the lifeblood of creating jobs? You'll get to find out. So I did my own promo, I did the AUBER promo. And with that, I will pass this on to my fellow board member, Vanessa Fry from Boise State. And I hope, Vanessa, over there, your temperature is very hot. You are 15 degrees hotter than Hotlanta. And the front page of the Wall Street Journal says that your housing market is cooling. So at least you have some relief somewhere. So with that, all yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's great to be here with my colleagues from AUBER today and with all of you that are joining us. It is hot here, and I am hoping that our housing market cools down. That's maybe another conversation for a future AUBER roundtable discussion. But I'm here today to introduce our guest and our speaker, Chris Chmura, who's going to be talking to us about demystifying the labor force participation data. And she's just the person to be doing this for us today. She's the CEO and chief economist for Chmura Economics and Analytics, which is a quantitative research and economic development and workforce consulting firm. She's located in Richmond, Virginia. She's widely quoted in publications across the country and is really looked to for her expertise. Earlier in her career, she received her doctorate in business with a specialization in finance and economics from Virginia Commonwealth University, and also received a bachelor's and a master's degree from Clemson. Earlier in her career, she was the chief economist at Crester Bank, which was the 30th largest bank in the nation before its merger with SunTrust. She also works quite a bit with the public sector. Dr. Chmura has served on the Virginia Governor's Advisory Board of Economists under the last 9 administrations, which is a huge accomplishment, and is the past president of the Virginia Association of Economists and is a past board member of the National Association of Business Economics. We are so happy to have Chris with us today, and I will pass the mic over to her. And remember, all of you in the audience, please put your Q&A questions in the Q&A section, and we will get to those after Chris talks with us. So now I will pass the mic over to our guest, Chris.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Thanks for that nice introduction. And let me share my screen now. And let me move this here. There we go. Okay, so demystifying the labor force participation. So what's happening with the labor force today? And of course, there are a lot of reasons why the labor participation rate is so low. And we've talked about many of these, but it's interesting that a lot of research has been done on this by now. Retirement, of course, is one of the issues. The generous stimulus checks and the payment deferrals that we saw. Childcare issues have been one of the problems. And vaccine mandates, COVID fears, and now we have long COVID that is actually contributing to the low participation rate. And as I go through this presentation, I'll give some examples of how some regions and enterprises have been trying to bring people back into the labor force. So with that, let's go over these potential drivers. But first, looking at the overall data, of course, here we're going back to the before the 1950s. Gray shaded areas are recessions. Here, we saw the baby boomers and more women coming into the labor force, it getting up to a participation rate of about 600,000, then coming down somewhat. As part of this has been retirement, but you'll see on the next slides, there are other factors going on here. The huge drop off in COVID, when we had COVID and people were told to stay at home if they did not have essential jobs or to work from home, some businesses were shut down. And now it's come back up, but we're still about 560,000 workers, less than we would have had pre-COVID had the participation rate not fallen off. The Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond has done some interesting work, and they found, according to their work, that about 20% of the shortfall in the participation rate that was occurring around this period in time from February 2020 to August 2021 was because of all the relief funds. People didn't have to work. They had enough money so that they could not have to go back to work. So here you would expect to see an increase in compensation and other benefits to bring people back to the office. In terms of the stimulus money, some of that seems to be wearing off now. So here we're looking at total personal savings, 3 gray shaded areas are recessions. And notice pre-COVID, the savings amount of all people was around 1 trillion. Just before we went into the recession, we had a very good economy. We saw an uptick in personal savings overall, big uptick when we got the first stimulus, and then people didn't spend all that money. It was still at about 2 trillion. We got the second stimulus, jumped back up, again came down a bit. People didn't spend all their money. The third stimulus, almost up to $6 trillion again in savings. And now over time, with the latest data in May, you can see we're about back to where we had been previous to the pandemic. So this factor is starting to go away. That is, people are probably going to have to start coming back to work because they don't have as much in savings from the stimulus plans. Older workers are one of the big factors here. And there are quite a few studies out on older workers now, and some of them vary in terms of the impact that retirement or older workers are going to have, and some of it's based on the demographic that we're looking at. Some studies just look at 65 and older, and they come to different conclusions than those that look at 55 and older. But in any case, again, here we're looking at the trends in 55 and plus in terms of their participation rate. Notice back in 2000, people were actually working longer. They found that by working a couple extra years that they could have more money in retirement. They were in service jobs where they could, or professional jobs where it was easy for them to work longer as opposed to manual labor type jobs. But then going into the recession, the COVID recession, you can see the huge drop off. And you can see also on the right-hand side here that we've not gotten back to the levels that we saw previously. So right now, about 630,000 workers are not in the labor force that are 55 and plus. So how could we encourage them back? They have a lot of flexibility now, so they're going to want to have flexibility to come back to the office. Maybe they can create their own business, and I'll show you some data on that. But there's an interesting study, and I really encourage you to get a copy of this and read the whole study. It's from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. And they used some data from the current population survey, and they looked at the share of older workers who were retiring post-pandemic. It was around 15%. After the pandemic, it jumped to 23%, or that is 7.6% above pandemic levels. And what they found is, although more people left the labor market, not all of them retired. That is, the retirement wage only increased by an average 1%. And many of these people, according to the data that they looked at from the CPS survey, were on the bylines, were willing to come back to work if the appropriate job came. And again, I think part of the reason why they found those results is because they're looking at 55 and over people. And not everyone can get social, or you can't get your maximum amount of Social Security if you're retiring at the age of 55. consistent with these results, they looked at Social Security data and benefits did not jump. So that gives support for the fact of what they found, which is that a lot of people left the labor force, but not many of them retired. They go into some detail about different groupings. Women without a college degree were more likely to leave the labor force. Asian Americans as well, more so than whites and Hispanic, although they didn't give a reason for why they found that, or they did not speculate. And also it makes sense that occupation where remote work is not possible, more of those people left the labor force. And of course, that was probably because they feared getting COVID. So here are the business starts, and here's another interesting database that probably some of you have looked at. And this is from Census. It comes out monthly, and they break out business starts into those with high propensity applications, that is those that are likely to grow at a faster rate in the future, and those that are not high propensity. So these applications are based on someone applying for a FEIN number, a federal employer ID number. And those that they find have high propensity to grow in the future, again, those that are in the light orange down here, are either corporate entities or in their application, they provide a date of a first hire, or they provide already they have employees. And then there are certain NAICS codes that they say are high propensity. Some of these surprised me: accommodation and food services, construction, some of the manufacturing firms, then all of retail, all of education, and all of healthcare. They consider, if they have an application for a business start, that they're high propensity to grow in the future. But again, you can see that when we went into COVID, that it fell off the cliff. By the time we got more into COVID, we were seeing record numbers of business applications. Again, this is a great data set for those of you that want to look into it in more depth. It's available by state, and you could download the data back many years, and you could pull out factors such as all business applications, or you can just look at those that have high propensities to grow, or those that are not high propensity to grow, and look at that in your state relative to other states over time. By state, they don't show it for NAICS code, but they just show total there. NAICS code, you have to look at the US data. And then participation rate for 16 to 19-year-olds. This one is interesting. So in red, we're showing 16 to 19-year-olds, and then I'm showing the 55 plus as a contrast. But this is the group that dropped the fastest during COVID, but it also came back the fastest. Probably dropped the fastest because many of these people are in services jobs where they were told the businesses shut down for those first couple of months, and then rebounded because some of the older workers who did not want to work during COVID left the labor force, provided opportunities for the 16 to 19-year-olds. So at this point, it's a bit lower than pre-COVID times, but only 147,000 lower. So how do we get these people back into the labor force? Focus on diversity and inclusion, or maybe dual enrollment. But what is interesting to me here is that their participation rate has been dropping for some time. So really, we have to go back further in time to the 1990s, where there are much higher levels. And I think that's in terms of, if we're trying to get participation rates up, we shouldn't just look at since 2000, but previous to that. Of course, some of the research shows that these individuals are staying in school longer or going back to school, which is keeping it lower. Now we're breaking out in red individuals with no high school, with no college degree, 25 years and over. And again, you can see how that dropped off. Their participation dropped off greatly. And I think similar to the 16 to 19-year-olds, probably many of these people in jobs where businesses shut down and you couldn't social distance as easily. And so the rate did not come up as fast. But again, here, we should be looking at, I think, not just pre-COVID time, but how do we get the rates back up to where they were 20 years or so ago? And maybe here we can be looking at internships, paid apprenticeships, focus on diversity and inclusion. But the other thing that's really come out during COVID is that perhaps you don't need a bachelor's degree for all jobs. maybe we just need certifications, and maybe that can help get some of these people back into the labor force that are high school grads with no college. And then, of course, men versus women. Right now, about 243,000 fewer men working previous to COVID, about 804,000 fewer women working previous to COVID. Of course, no surprise about the trends in these lines. But the question is, well, before we get to the question of some of the explanations for not as many women coming back into the labor market, this is something that we all run into when we're looking at our analysis and doing our forecasting, and that is sometimes we see changes in the baseline, and whenever we see a pop like this in a trend, so here we're looking at civilian labor force for men versus women, and the BLS back in January of 2022 adjusted the CPS population base to improve methodology estimations. And so part of the decline in male participation was due to that small spike there. But then back to the women, their participation ratio is likely tied to caretaking needs, according to some studies. And here we're looking at the participation rate for women, just going back to 2019, so you can get a better sense of the trend there. And notice here in September 2021, when the school season started back up, you saw a pretty good increase in participation rate among women. Again, people speculating that's because more women were staying at home when kids were learning from home than men, and that caused part of the lower rate and now the recent uptick. But in addition, childcare has always been an issue, or continues to be an issue. And here we're looking at employment. We have a product called Jobs EQ that's used by over 700 entities in the US that looks at employment data, has job postings in it, resumes, looks at forecasts. And here we're looking at childcare services in the US. The total employed, average wage is low compared to all industries at 65,000. Over the last 2 years, we saw a drop off of almost 100,000 jobs. Here, this chart, Spark chart, shows you the decline and then a little bounce back. And on the right-hand side, overall jobs, a one-year forecast, but it's a one-year forecast on average for the next 10 years, expected to grow 0.8, and childcare employment expected to grow a bit faster, 1.1%. So in addition to needing 11,000 people a year for childcare services to take care of kids, because of growth in daycare services, we're going to need another 67,000 people a year, because people in child daycare services are leaving that industry, going to others. And then in addition to that, under the exit column, we need nearly another 58,000, because oftentimes people are retiring and leaving overall. So the demand every year just to fulfill childcare services employment demands is 136,000. So clearly an industry that is growing but pays a low wage. If we look at again, what happened during COVID, a huge drop off here. Part of it was because childcare had to shut down during that period of time where a lot of industries were shutting down. But as it came back, we're still not up to where we were pre-COVID levels. On the earlier slide, you saw wages were low. So here I'm showing you historical wages, and that after we came out of COVID, you can see that the pace of wages picked up, but they still remain very low compared to other wages. Here we're looking at the number of establishments. So the number of establishments, and as you all know, this comes from the QCEW data. So it could be that there are, Rainbow Childcare, there could be 10 branches. That would mean there's 10 establishments as opposed to just counting at one time. So you can see that came down, and then we're trending upward here on the latest data. So there are more establishments, good sign, but still employment is down from pre-COVID levels. And here again, employment is down by almost 100,000 over the last 2 years. So then the question becomes, well, does it make sense to send kids to childcare or to work? So I'm just using Virginia, since I'm in Virginia now, as an example. And you can go to this site and you can see what the childcare costs on average are for every state in the nation, if you want to duplicate this for your region. So the annual cost of childcare in Virginia is $14,000. The monthly cost then comes to a little bit over $1,000. So let's assume you have 2 children in daycare under 6. What would be your take-home pay if you made $9.50? Well, you wouldn't have any, so you couldn't afford to put a child, if you were a single parent, in daycare if you were making $9.50 an hour. Minimum wages in states, the lowest is $7.25, the highest is $15.20. If you were making $15, one of the higher ones, you'd still only have $256. I say this is the take-home pay. It's not really, because I haven't taken taxes out of this. This is just what's left over after you've paid for childcare. If you're making $20 an hour, then you'd have $1,123 left. So you can see clearly that childcare is an issue that some policies would be helpful around to help get some people back participating in the labor force. And of course, some enterprises have started to increase childcare so that they can get more people back. And then I said pandemic impact on labor force. What I should have said was COVID's impact on the labor force, because COVID or long COVID is now having an impact. So this group long COVID initiative formed over the last couple of years. And this is, again, another great site where you can get a lot of information on long COVID, that is people that have COVID, not just for a week, but for weeks and for months. And here, nearly a third of those impacted by COVID are still experiencing some symptoms after it. Some of them are just mild and they could work. Others are to the degree that they can't work. Here they have an estimate where at the end of December 2021, they estimated it could be just below 15 million, or at the high end, as much as double that amount. And then here again, I'd encourage you to go to their site and get some data. And the Brookings Institute has done some good research on it recently, and they have estimated it accounts for about 15% of the 10.6 million unfilled jobs in the US. So here again, another issue that's keeping the labor force down. I know at least a couple of months ago, COVID was not considered a disability, and I don't believe it has been, long COVID that is, has been identified as a disability at this point in time yet. One more item, again, something that I encourage you to take a look at this study is the impact from changing attitudes toward work. So now that we've been given the option of remote work, we've got all this improved flexibility. Some people are preferring that and staying out of the workforce because they would prefer to have that flexibility. If they can't find it, then they're not going back in the labor force, to the degree that the NBER in this study, again, another good one I'd encourage you to read, found that the reservation wage has increased 6.2% during the pandemic, which of course has then caused, with inflation now, I'm wondering how that reservation wage may be changing, because if they would look at it from an inflation adjusted point of view. But in any case, interesting to see that the reservation wage rose during the pandemic. So in conclusion then, this pandemic has created a really challenging climate for employers. The low participation rates are causing many regions, economic developers, and employers to look for strategies to bring people back to the workforce. And now that we've heard that we may be in a recession, if we're not now, one may come late this year or early next year, according to some forecasters. Will a recession change the pandemic-induced work from home policies? So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, everyone online can join me in giving Chris a silent round of applause for that amazing presentation. Thank you so much for that. And look, actually, I see silent applause rising up on the screen. That's amazing. Zoom, work from home, work from your office. We've got all these new things we can do to show our appreciation. I'm going to put the first question out there. And then again, for those of you out in the audience, you can hit that Q&A button that you see and put your questions in there. And we'll get to your questions too. But I'm going to start about jumping off what you kind of ended with. So with this thought that we might be entering into a recession, if we think back to past recessions, was there consumer or business behaviors that changed during the recessions and then held afterwards? Did they hold after the recession ended? So we're kind of talking about that right now. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. You know, whenever we go through a recession, it seems to accelerate a trend that's already happening. But let's go back to, say, July 1990. Do you remember that recession? Went through March of 91. And it was sort of like a rolling recession. It started, it seemed like down in Texas and maybe related to some oil issues, but it was an office market point thing. So believe it or not, back in the 1990s, we didn't have all these organizations that kept track of office starts and what were the rental rates. And so we had all these banks that were putting out these speculative loans to create new offices because there was great demand. And so I was up here in Virginia at the time and actually was given or the opportunity to work in Crestar Bank came because they were seeing a period where there was tons of overbuilding in office, and Sovereign Bank, for example, in Northern Virginia went out of business. All these banks were giving loans on speculative office. No one was tracking it. So Bank A didn't know that Bank B gave out all these loans. And so when the recession came, we had all these empty offices. And if you're from the Northern Virginia area, you may remember the 66 corridor. If you've ever gone to Dulles, they called it see-through buildings because you can look on either side and the buildings, there was a structure, but the glass was not there. You could see right through it. And previous to the recession, all of the bankers were so excited about all this building that was going on, they'd get a helicopter and fly the investment bankers around to see count all of the cranes that were in the areas. You probably had this in different regions. Well, I used to give presentations to the leadership on a regular basis during that time. And the CEO made the comment once, "We will never do this again. We will never give a speculative loan because this has been so difficult for us." And believe it or not, so 4 years later, I'm giving these presentations and guess what? There's speculative loans all over the place. It's like they had forgotten that. And then the other, maybe more recent, remember the housing crisis, 2007 to 2009, and prices of homes were falling. And I remember a woman wrote a book called Less is Better, Smaller is Better. And her thesis was that never again will we see these large, McMansions. Anyone who has a house bigger than 4,500 square feet, you're not going to be able to sell it because we've learned house prices can go down. We're not buying these big houses. And she sold quite a few copies, I think, and people believe that. But then again, 4, 5, 6 years after the recession is over, people are buying big houses and they continue to today. So yes, I think, the trend that we saw working remotely, we're going to see an increase. We're going to see that continues to remain higher than it was during the pandemic, but we're not going to a point where it's totally, where it's going to be as high as it is today. And as a result, I think the participation rate, when we go into the next recession, we're going to start to see that tick upward too, as people find that they can't be as picky in finding jobs.
Thanks for that. That's really great. One of the things that you were talking about regarding the see-through buildings, and I've been thinking about this. So I'm in Boise, Idaho, and I think about how so many people went remote, and a lot of my colleagues continue to have some sort of work from home element, right? Well, how does that impact the concentrated areas where they were working? The downtown corridors, or the places with more of those service industry or retail that relied on those workers being in those corridors on a regular basis. How is that kind of affecting those economies or the economy in general?
Right. Yeah, and of course, we all know we do our economic impact studies. And so if people are not at the office, then they're not spending their money in the restaurants nearby. Some of them are closing. So certainly in the larger metropolitan areas, especially those where public transportation is more prevalent, people are still not comfortable yet getting on public transportation. We saw the impact on increase in demand for cars. But again, there too, we're starting to see a bit of a comeback with some industries more than others requiring workers to come and work at the office. But then the other thing we're also seeing is some of the more expensive areas, the offices or the bigger financial institutions or bigger companies are seeing that it's nice to have satellites. People don't want to drive in as far, so they may have some fat satellites around New York City or around Los Angeles. So but that is having an impact, but we're starting to see some improvement in terms of inner cities.
This is kind of building off that kind of what you just said about the kind of the larger urban centers. And earlier when I was giving the introduction, I was mentioning the housing market in Boise, and we saw quite an influx of people from the coast and large urban centers the last 10 years, but really we saw it quite a bit during the last 2 years, perhaps spurred by COVID. And this is more like anecdotal and kind of thinking about where we could look at data, those of us that are thinking of grabbing this labor force data to think about how it's affecting our regions. If someone moves to a lower cost area with a wage from a higher paying area, right? So San Francisco Bay Area to maybe Boise, Idaho, how is that affecting different markets? And, just one of the things I'm wondering is if that California employer is going to say, that's fine if you live in Boise, but your wage is going to come down. I'm kind of curious to see if there's a way to track that or what you've seen in that regard.
Yeah, and we've heard about both. So some companies have said, if right now to work in San Francisco for an IT job is $110,000, but if you move to Nebraska, the cost of living is so much lower, it's $60,000. So they're going to make them take that cut. But then there are other companies that are not doing that at all. They're just letting people work wherever they want to. And I think to me, the bigger question is going to be, can you create the culture that you need by having people working all over the place, or at some place where they have to fly in and maybe just come in once a quarter. And I think that's when we see this recession, that's going to be something that I think we're going to end up seeing change. It's similar to the other recessions with the office market and with the housing market, where we think right now, given the trends that we're in, there's no way we're going to go back to the way it previously was. But I think as business people try to figure out how to best grow their company, they're going to have to take culture into account. And can they maintain or create that culture with people working from home? And then the other factor too is, we're a small company here. We're about 50 people. Our consulting group is about 7 people, but at least we found that when you have young graduates just out of school, they either, number one, want to be around people because they want to learn, or they really need to be because they really haven't learned how to work in 8 to 5 jobs, or they don't have the discipline without seeing how other people work around them. And as I've said here with some of our economists that are in the back of that office here, I won't get on the phone and call them up and say, hey, GDP came out today. Did you notice it? And it was negative. So what does that mean? And what do you think the Fed's going to do? But I'll walk down the hall when it comes out and talk to them about it. So I think those are important things that we shouldn't lose.
Definitely. And I question for myself if that's, am I hanging on to that because that's what I like, right? Or is that really the case? But I still feel like it's really the case that building the culture, it's really hard to do online, to get to know people and build that trust and have a strong culture. Okay, so I have a question here from the audience. So I'm just going to read it. How has the push for workers to improve their education and seek out higher skilled jobs affected the less appealing low wage, low skilled jobs and often unappealing jobs. Kind of in addition, do employers need to actively improve the work environment, wages, and respect so they can again attract workers?
Yeah, I think both of those things. So especially those individuals who were, they were told to stay at home if you were in a retail establishment and you were out for maybe 3-4 months and you were being paid even more than if you would have been working. If you were very ambitious or just considered, maybe it's time to do something else. Certainly, a lot of those people got online, and some organizations, some of the organizations that provide online education even gave out free opportunities for people, and so they did get upskilled. Went from retail to IT, or went from retail to getting some certain certification. And so they were able to get different jobs. And so, yes, those jobs, it kind of almost pushed some of the industries to have to automate. So previous to COVID, I don't remember going to a McDonald's and going to a kiosk and putting in what I wanted to order, but that's happening with more frequency. So those are some small things, or even the going to a grocery store and putting something into your basket and it gets, you get charged, or taking it out and you're not charged. Those kind of things are accounting for some of those jobs that people don't like as much, that are low paying jobs. Now we're seeing technology to take care of that. And then I think for employers, yes, we need to give more opportunities to help people improve their skills, so that they will want to come to the office and they will want to work for us, because the quits rate is still so high. So not only are we in the situation with the participation rate is so low, but supply and demand has picked up after COVID, and people start quitting their jobs, going to others. And I'm sure you've all looked at the JOLTS data, and we only have it back to 20 years. So we're still near record levels in terms of people quitting. But they don't quit during recessions. They don't quit when they're thinking, if I quit this job and go to another one, will it work out? If we're in a recession, I may have a hard time finding a job. But when COVID ended, it really spiked. And I think part of it too was people getting different skills while they were out of work, so that they could look for a different job.
All right, we have another question here in the Q&A chat. What about foreign-born workers? This person is wondering how many went home and account for missing workers. So is that, are we seeing that in this dip in the labor force?
Right. So if they've left the country, if they've left, then yeah, I guess some of that, the number of workers, that would have an impact. So yes, I'm thinking of hotels. I'm thinking of entertainment such as Busch Gardens or King's Dominion, places that operate only in the summer, have had a hard time last year in particular finding workers. Not quite as hard this year, but still difficulty in finding the staff that they need. So with a pickup in opportunities, because people are not wanting to get out, some of the hotels are having to, or the entertainment centers are having to limit the number of people just because the number of visitors, because they can't get enough workers. So yes, I would say that's having an impact as well.
So this is somewhat related, but a little different kind of angle, thinking of foreign-born workers. This is a question, is there an increased risk with remote work environments for more offshoring of high-paying jobs? So not necessarily the people coming here, but maybe US businesses offshoring high-paying jobs.
Yeah, that's a good question. It seems that we saw more of that several years ago, and then I'm thinking of banks and other institutions. We found where the difference in time zone made it difficult. The difference in communicating made it difficult, and even call centers, it seems some of that's coming back to the US. And part of that was complaints from the people who were calling into those call centers. But I'm thinking of one very large Indian firm that has, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but looking to the US there were a lot of call centers, of course, going to India. And now that particular big firm wants to relocate here in the US and have Americans in those call centers. So work from home, yeah, that may cause some people to think, well, if we can work from home, 100 miles away or 300 miles away, then why not just outsource this 1,000 miles away where it's going to be even cheaper? But again, I think culture, time zones all play there.
So I was thinking about just kind of everything we've talked about and how disruption, in the economy or in something like a pandemic, sometimes people are forced to innovate, right? Innovation is something that can help a business survive and thrive, perhaps during challenging times. Are there particular innovations you've noticed or know about that, and it could be the public sector or private sector, that is, they're trying to innovate to help with this labor force issue?
Yeah, so clearly, not having people on the front line, those types of innovations, we're seeing more robotics put in place. So, for example, I mentioned that we have job postings in our Jobs EQ software. And so we were looking at things like, so we can pull open all the job posts for Amazon. And when we did that some time ago, at the top, there were a lot of things related to IT, robotics, et cetera. And you look at some other, I won't mention any names, but some other large warehouses. And at the very top of the list is handlers, people who package handlers. And we're seeing some of that. So more warehouses are starting to use robotics than just what we saw at Walmart. Other innovations that we're seeing. Well, does the audience have any examples of innovations that they've seen recently? Some good ones, maybe that you can share.
Yeah, that'd be great. And you could I think you might be able to put that in the chat if the audience has any innovations. And I'll mention two that I've recently come across. One was in an article that James actually sent, and it was talking about the younger workforce, those 16 to 19-year-olds that you were talking about earlier, and an employer that was really struggling and I think it was a food service type, fast food service, and they developed what they called a training program, and they kind of labeled it as a training program, and then the students were able to kind of put it on their resumes, show that they've done this training program, but then also actually provide labor for their food service industry. So that's one that was, it was kind of an N of one. Another one is one I came across last week when I was serving on a panel for the Council of State Governments, and there was a woman from Utah that was serving on the panel, and I was talking about housing, and she was talking about the labor force. And there is, I thought it was a really innovative effort on the behalf of the state of Utah that has a program they just implemented, I think about 12 months ago, called Return Utah. And the idea is to provide returnships for people who have been out of the labor force for 2 or more years. And there's some exceptions for shorter periods of time. And what they do is they're bringing in cohorts of these individuals, and there's no, the individuals don't have to have a reason why they've been out of the workforce. It could have been a long-term disability, it could have been COVID, it could have been a parent decided to stay home with the kids, but then they bring them back into the workforce at the level they left. And so most of these are mid-level, and they have a paid returnship for 16 weeks, and and are able to get back into the workforce. And then I think, I'm not going to get the statistics quite right, but I think it was over 90% of these returnees, they call them, were able to then get long-term employment after those 16 weeks. So it's a pretty small program. I think they've only had 50 or so individuals participate. I think they kind of started as a pilot, but I thought that was really interesting to think of who are those people out there in the labor force that maybe haven't participated for a long time, have a high level set of skills, and we can get them to integrate back in. Let's see, I'm looking, there's some more questions. I don't know. Oh, Victoria has one on innovation. She said this is in Japan. The 7-Eleven convenience store is fully automated with intelligent inventory. You just set up an account ahead of time so it knows how to charge you. That's pretty fascinating. And then someone else mentioned the shift to online ordering and curbside delivery on a large scale, which I experienced last night. I was coming home from the Boise airport, and I called Uber, and I'm in the Uber and I get this push message like, "Are you hungry? Deliver or order from Uber Eats now." And I was thinking, oh my God, it knows I'm going home. I've been traveling because I'm coming from the airport and I probably am hungry. And it, was trying to get me, it was like pushing a service to me through Uber Eats, which I thought was pretty interesting. Okay, we do have another, oh, go ahead. Were you gonna say something, Chris?
No, go right ahead. Those are good ones. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, those are some good ones. And feel free, anyone, to continue to share those. There is another question in the Q&A. Have there been regional differences in labor LFPR recovery? So labor force
participation
recovery. Okay, that's LFPR recovery around the US following the pandemic. So regional differences. If so, what would be the driving, what's the driving factor in those differences?
Yes, there have been. And some of the industries that are in the area. So for example, where you have someplace where it's more tourism related, the rebound hasn't been as fast as opposed to some that are more IT related, where you can work from home. In fact, we did a blog on this. If you just Google Chmura, and I think it's remote work, and we ranked all of the areas where most of the remote work could be done, and where we saw more people, the participation rate or employment coming back faster. But clearly industry mix is one of it. This MBER study, I think I mentioned, or actually it wasn't the MBER study, it was the retirement study, Center for Studying Disability Policy. And you would have thought that regions did not come back as fast participation rate if there was more COVID was higher, and they did not find that to be the case. That places where the infections were higher did not have an impact on whether or not people came back. But I would say a big driver would be just the industries that are in the region.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, especially with that COVID, and are we seeing that any cyclical COVID effects, right, with these places that are having the higher infection rates? We have one last question here, and then I'm going to hand it back over to James to wrap us up. So here's the question. Workforce participation has been trending down for quite a while, with a small recovery just before the pandemic. It now appears back to that same trend line. How likely are we really to, quote, recover versus this is just a trend that was sped up?
Yeah, so to the degree that more people are retiring, yeah, the baby boomer seems to have had an impact as it's gone through its age group, or through its entire life has had a big impact on the US economy. But I would expect that at some point, I don't know, certainly when we come out of the next recession, and I'm assuming that there's going to be a recession beyond the 2 quarters that we're seeing right now, but I would think that participation rates will start to pick back up. But you look at the different age groupings, it's disconcerting about the 16 to 19-year-olds that has come down so much. Is that going to get back up to previous levels with a lot of them, staying out to go to school? And of course, the long-term implication for the US economy is not good because our GDP growth is based on labor force growth and productivity. And if the labor force is going to continue to grow at a much smaller rate because we're not seeing the population grow as much, then our economy won't grow as fast. So I guess I'm walking all over this question and going in different directions. One of the ways that we could see participation pick up if we were selective about immigration, bringing in more high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers to fill those jobs at both ends of the spectrum. So you would have thought I was a politician with that answer, but that's why I've been in the governor's advisory board for the last 9 governors.
Yeah, that was a very well stated, objective answer to that question. All right, thank you so much, Chris, for your time today. I am going to pass the mic back over to my colleague James.
That's wonderful. I was going to make a crack about a two-handed economist, but the joke kind of gets old, I guess. Well, I want to thank Chris and Vanessa and Rajeev for all of your work today. We appreciate all of your wise thoughts and your efforts here. So I want to invite all of you to join us for the next AUBER Roundtable. That'll be on September the 8th. We're going to have another fantastic discussion. So watch your email on the AUBER website for more information on that as we release information in the next couple of weeks. Today's presentation will be made available on the AUBER website, and we encourage you to visit www.auber.org to learn more about our annual conference and email discussion platform. From all of us at AUBER, thank you for attending today, and we hope you have a great day.